Welcome again, all the good saints and good people, to this yet another edition of Why Mark is an Important Evangelist to Africans, and him being an African, why it was important for him to be the first to write the gospel. For us, we believe it is out of his faith, and probably he also felt pity for himself when he left Christ at the Garden of Gethsemane, or if you like, the Mount of Olives, when he was almost being arrested together with Jesus, but he fled the arrest, leaving behind his cloak. And so Mark is a very important person in the life and the works of Jesus Christ. He is again the person who could have been allowed, like his mother was allowed to host Christ in Jerusalem and the apostles until the Pentecost, and probably even thereafter. Mark is allowed to be part of the three who went to confirm that Jesus has really risen. And because according to the Jewish traditions and laws, which had not really, the apostles had not really vacated from completely, they could not even go near the tomb. And so that's why the angels appeared to them, something that we should all be conscious of. The angels appeared to them because they could not enter the tomb. But one thing that is unique about us Africans, Mark was not bound by those laws. So he entered the tomb and truly confirmed and held the shawls that Jesus was wrapped by during his placement in readiness for his burial on Sunday. And so Mark confirms and he brings the shawls. And remember, these shawls were a subject of great piety that brought great depth in the European Christianity. If you watch the movie, it's called something like the shawl of Shruin or something like that. I'm yet to confirm, but it cost many deaths for around or about 300 years. And so, well, it is really a pity that some of these piety claims that costed very many lives. And you have to really be pitiful to the European Christianity, because it had really subjugated people to darkness, even though the Christianity has been there for very many years. Because I don't understand why the gospel was, or the Bible was, in monologue, one language, where you're forcing people. And again, this is where the message of Christ and the mission of the kingdom was inhibited, because it was wrapped around a civilization. So the idea of Hellenizing people so that they can understand Christianity was so unfortunate, and the idea of Latinizing people so that they can understand Christianity from the Latin Bible. These were dark days for Christianity, and we thank the Lord for us having seen the light. And unfortunately, the light of Christianity, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa and the rest of Africa, was lit again after very many centuries. And so it is so unfortunate, and ours is just to pray for those people who made Christianity a nightmare. And the impacts of this are felt in Europe today, because their mega churches are turning into something different. Cafeterias, skateboard training grounds, brothels, and so on and so forth. Now, like we said, the Copts were pushed to the periphery, and their opinions never mattered in as far as Alexandria was concerned. And so the infiltration of the Europeans into the Alexandrian African Christianity played out. One, the political wing of the Roman Empire contributed immensely, and persecutions were very intense in Africa in these early stages. So after Jerusalem, Africa became the next big victim of persecutions, which we really never we were never really merited, because actually the Roman Empire had nothing to do with Africa. But since they had captured Africa, and this was the expansionist idea that also the church began to borrow, so it became the order of the day, and it was not a sin. And that's why sometimes even laws, sometimes we are cautioned, even if you're quoting a law or you're practicing a written law, you must connect it or apply it with morals. And that's why we have a lot of moral decay, because in this literal world, people are so wordy, but they act contrary, because the truth is not in what you say or what you read. The truth is in what that comes out of you. And so you may be good in quoting, but you act contrary. And so Africans began to be sidelined, and the church was persecuted. But between the first 200 years, the Coptic Christians had managed to establish a bishopric in almost 80% of their villages in the upper delta. They had begun to translate the gospel into their local languages. But there was an unfortunate thing that was happening. Since because they were chased from Alexandria and they had to rebel, so they fought back by not destroying the secular temple. And so you could have found Christians worshipping in the temple during the main feasts of the secular faith, or the old order of the Copts. And in this, in their interpretation or translation of the Bible, or rather even, let's say, the Gospel, because I don't think the Bible was even complete in the first century as we know it today. So they largely used the Markian Gospel. So in that, in their interpretation, in their hermeneutics, they also added African traditional views and world views. And so, even in their liturgical rituals, they added what was African because that is all they knew. And of course, it reached at a point where now the church became dominant when the Roman Empire was shifted from Rome to Anatolia, and Anatolia in a specific town, it became known as the city of Constantine, under the emperor who conquered Rome and decided to move to the Eastern Europe. Now, the Eastern European Christianity became a big church, because what was the big church between the 1st century and the 3rd century, or rather even the 4th century, was the African church. The Jerusalem church was no longer there, but it was the African church, the Palestine church, and the Roman church. The church in Greece and Macedonia and Cyprus were equally big, but they were out of the central focus of power. They were in the periphery. So Alexandria was close to Rome, as Jerusalem was. And also Cyprus and Greece were, let's say, probably rivals of the Roman Empire. So that's why they were in the periphery. And now the Roman Empire has gone to them. But I want you to understand the power play here. When the Roman Empire went to Turkey today, they were looking at not losing the Roman Empire, the Roman part of the empire and the African, but also to consolidate even much more further the involvement of the Eastern Europeans and also the Arabia. So that was the gist of the whole idea of shifting the offices, rather than the religious ideas that we are given by the church, that they moved there because Rome was becoming unholy. And so when Constantine gave the Edict of Milan in 313, the freedom of Christian worship became the new wave of his political support. But this was not the same case in Africa. So in Africa, the church was in the periphery. Alexandria was involved in the politics of Roman Empire, and so also the politics of the East and the West, which had really begun during the Alexander the Great's dynasties. This is where the East and the West division began before Christianity. And so Rome conquering these dynasties became a center of the divide between the Greeks and the Romans in a very elaborate manner. But remember, in as much as these divisions appeared, they were very keen to maintain their unity, because either of the sides had something that each side will have benefited from. So the Greeks were bad administrators, but the Romans were the greatest administrators in the history of the world. So the Greeks had a very good philosophy, and so they had to complement each other. But this was exacerbated again later when Christianity became a center or a platform of raising concerns, and they really missed a mark of love, because love is not emotional or affection. If you look at love from that perspective, you will only love what is good, but love actually becomes love when you love the imperfection, when you love what is not complete so that love can complete it. And so love becomes a decision. And so any subjugation that has ever occurred in the hands of Christians, these were members of religious movements or religious organizations and not real Christians. Because a Christian is identified by love, because we were loved by our Lord and God for us to love. That is the essence of Christianity. And so next time we shall look at the history and the involvement of the African Church in the ecumenical councils and why they were called ecumenical. And in this you will be able to understand how the Gospel of Mark and the mission of the African Church was thrown into disarray and into limbo, so that our European brothers and sisters could dominate the world, and this part of Africa is part of the then world. So remember your identity again, remember the purpose, your ontology, and remember that your identity speaks a lot volume about you than what you know by your mind, because what comes from your heart is true, willing, and permanent.